Dragger, an original novel by Robert Napier, narration and images powered by AI. Chapter 11, Maybe She Survived. Although Father Dragger always insisted the dining room be called the feeding area, Aunt Ruby absent-mindedly referred to the whole suite as the kitchens. It was the one place in the compound that didn't utterly reek of gore. The food was often kept hot, and the native herbs of the moor dried in large quantities overhead. Ruby filled a pitcher with green fluid, the consistency of swamp water, from a container on the counter. You're getting older now, and the time may come where you have to work in the manor when we have guests. Your father asked me to try again to teach you two how to behave. She put the pitcher on a tray with some earthen cups and started for the feeding area. Dex sat dutifully between the table and the window. She liked the window, even though the seating was cramped and uncomfortable. She sat in silence, as was the custom for food to be brought to her. Aunt Ruby made it quite clear that she would do the cooking for Vago and Dex, not because she enjoyed the work, but because neither could be trusted around food or fire. But Ruby did seem at least to get some satisfaction out of bemoaning the effort and reminding them of how much she suffered for their provision. Dex sat with Vago at a table with steaming plates of pork and vegetables as Aunt Ruby carried in a bowl of cooked grain. Dex's mind was racing with memories and terrors. She couldn't concentrate on her manners. She did not know what to make of the strange new slaves and their stories, but she resolved, for now, to keep this knowledge to herself, if for no other reason than to deny it to know-it-all smug jerk-face Vago. Ruby advised, "From time to time, your father has allowed officers and chieftains to visit us here. Now don't you go asking the whos and whys. That's none of your concern. All that matters is you know how to behave and follow strict instructions. You will act and speak politely, but you will also listen and watch." "Listen for what, Auntie?" asked Dex. "Not that you'd know an interesting fact if it beat you over the head, but you'll be expected to recall details from any conversation, however long or short, to combine bits of information you overhear from our guests." "You know," said Vago, wanting to demonstrate he understood the concept far better than Dex, "I think that teacher you bought might be a deserter." "What makes you think that?" "Just by the look of him, he's not the usual type. I think he might be a joker. If Father finds out..." Dex seized the moment to redirect. "I thought the jokers were all run out of Jodah. Vago doesn't know what he's talking about." Ruby hissed at them for chattering, threatening to strike. "That old man is just a school teacher. Tomorrow, you will take them to the thrash for target practice. That'll be the end of it." "But what if there's a reward?" "There won't be," scolded Ruby, inexplicably near tears. "Lord Dragger hardly comes here anymore. Our children are either dead or followed him off to war. I don't think he even cares about this place, or any of us. But he's our father. I told you to forget it. Your only concern is putting the new slaves to work. In the morning, I want them clearing the silage pits." "But you said..." "Yes, madam," sighed Vago. After he shoved a couple of spoonfuls into his mouth, he went on, "Actually, I was thinking about moon season. I want to go see Father." Although she tried to suppress it, Ruby's face became a scowl. She managed to speak through gritted teeth. "You mean before the carve?" "Sure, there are plenty of slaves." Vago pointed at Dex. "Carving night is when Father expects you here. Just do as you're taught, and then you can go die for him, for all I care." Vago sulked, while Dex continued to toy with her food in silence. She was relieved to have a quiet dinner and not talk about the strangers anymore. After rubbing her forehead till the makeup smeared, Ruby calmed herself and forced a smile. "You must understand. Your father expects me to teach you. You are not meant to be a soldier. You're going to take over for me here someday. I don't want to live here anymore. Look, you don't have a choice. What? You want to go fight for the Crush? You want to be just another landless, wandering orphan, Not everyone is as generous as your father and I. You think the world is just going to hand you a bed and a table and take care of your lazy, worthless ass. Vago pushed his half-eaten plate of food aside and stood. Yeah, that's what you always say. But last season, Lurk and Gretch went with father. Vago started out of the feeding area. Where are you going? Vago turned back. Nowhere. Dex mechanically finished her dinner, avoiding her aunt's daring eyes. As far as I'm concerned, both of you will be here forever, and I'll have to feed your thankless faces. Against her better judgment, Dex blurted, You're just a pigger, Vago, not a great warrior like father. Vago, through years of ruthless conditioning, was unable to strike out at Ruby, but he angrily threw his earthen dish at Dex's head. Dex, who quite honestly expected the outburst, avoided the plate, but was spattered with leavings, flaring with long-suppressed rage over Rux and Dweller, Ruby and Low and Mud and Shit, and loneliness and fear. She launched herself across the table at Vago, but before she could get a finger on him, Ruby caught her with unexpected strength. You both want to fight? You want to fight like little piggies? To the thrash. Fine by me, growled Vago. Dex, more than a head shorter, wouldn't back down. She glared up at him. He brushed past her, hitting her with his shoulder. Dex balled up her fists and followed him. They went single file to the training ground. Some folks were watching. To the onlookers, it was unclear whether Vago was leading Dex there, or she was driving him forward. As Vago and Dex entered the bone circle, she knew perfectly well that no one was on her side. She had no delusions that anyone would intervene on her behalf, and if Vago killed her savagely enough, he'd be that much closer to his dreams. At a nod from Aunt Ruby, all others vacated the arena, taking up ritualistic perches on the fringe. Ruby, gore whip in hand, seated herself on cushions under the pergola. There's no ceremony. Vago spun on Dex, shoving hard into her. Dex braced, but was flung off her feet, almost somersaulting backward, falling hard on her shoulders. Her breath was ripped from her lungs. She scrambled onto her hands and knees, gasping for air. Vago kicked her in the ribs, knocking her onto her back. Dex rolled sideways, narrowly avoiding his stomp. He kicked at her again. This time she managed to push back his leg, off-balancing him enough for her to stand. He lunged at her again, and she shambled backward. Vago took a quick shuffle step, changed leads, then shoved her with all his force. It was the same result. Dex's feet flew into the air, and she dropped hard. This time, she managed to exhale before the hit and rolled forward, grabbing Vago's leg. Vago stumbled, and half falling was forced to sit in the sand. Dex, not sure how to capitalize on this advantage, began dragging him by his foot, trying to prevent him from standing. It didn't work. He dug in with one heel and shook the other until Dex lost her hold. They both leapt up at arm's length, but Vago's arms were much longer than hers, and with a quick feint, seized her thick, tangled hair. He yanked her head forward, then violently to the side, causing her to barrel roll in the air and flop onto the ground. Dex had known she was going down and was already springing back. She leapt into the air and came down with her whole body weight into his arms. He essentially caught her, but fell backward. He used the energy of the fall to lift her bodily over his head and throw her to the ground with a rattling thud. Vago stood up fast, but Dex lay stunned. I'm so fucking sick of you, shouted Vago. He jumped on top of her. No strategy, no technique, just his older, heavier body pinning her to the ground. She resisted, covering her face. He began punching her, his fists like hammers. He banged on her hands and forearms. She writhed spastically, trying to avoid the blows. When he tired of pounding on her, he went for her throat. He wrapped his long, bony hands around her neck and pressed down while he squeezed. With few options left, Dex collapsed into full panic. She raked at his eyes, but her fingers fell wildly short of his face, just grazing his upper arm. Her face purpled, but her eyes were still golden and sparking fury at him. Her body twisted fantastically under his weight, and her feet kicked up marvelous plumes of sand to no avail. Vago spat at her. "Why won't you just die? Just die. Everybody hates you." Dex could feel the darkness closing on her mind. She could hear the blood pulsing and piling in her temples. But she would never give up. Not to Dragger, not to Ruby, and certainly not to Vago. And weirdly enough, she almost loved Vago at this very moment, because for the first time since he doused her with water, she could see some life in his pallid eyes. She was almost happy for him, that he could say and do to her what he wanted to say and do to the world. Vago's determination, in that instant, was equal to her own. They knew each other at that moment, knew that neither would quit, and that's how Dex knew she had to die. Vago, the know-it-all, would never expect her to quit. So she did. She heaved one last time, then died. Vago wouldn't believe it. He clenched down as hard as he could. He had to destroy her. It wasn't enough to kill her. He had to break her. To kill and break whatever obnoxious, prideful sprite kept her alive. He couldn't believe it when she died. But she must be dead, because Dex never quit. Never. No matter how weak and inept she was. He almost felt bad. Momentarily disgusted with her weakness, he released her. He pondered her bloated face, frothy from spittle, sand, and blood. Squatting on her limp body, he turned to look at Ruby, seeking approval, approbation. He didn't know. That's when the world went black. Dex bolted up, her mouth agape with a war cry, but no breath to carry it. The heel of her palm smashed under Vago's chin, whipping back his head and launching him off of her, instantly unconscious. Their legs were intertwined, and Dex wiggled loose. She rose, wobbling to her feet. She pressed her boot onto Vago's face, harder and harder, until she was all but standing on him. It was so tempting to crush his nose, his jaw, his throat. But Dex didn't hate Vago, not the way he hated her. So she kicked sand in his face and spit blood. Vago roused, startled, and confused. He saw Dex standing over him. He didn't understand what was happening. She had been dead, weak, disgraced then. To him, in a blink, she was towering above him. "How? You cheated!" he screamed. He tried to rise, but was too dizzy. He flopped in the sand like a lost fish, frantically crawling out of the arena. He wailed to Aunt Ruby. "She can't do that. She can't pretend to lose and then win. She cheated." Ruby met him at the edge. She stared down at him with a mixture of pity, amusement, and disgust. "She can't cheat, because there are no rules. You're a cocky, vain little boy." Vago managed to find his feet, and possibly for the first time, realized he had grown taller than his aunt. But he shrank, humiliated, and went away. Dex sat down in the middle of the circle. Her body ached, and her breath came in uncontrollable, sharp spurts. She felt like she'd been trampled by gores. She pulled at her neck as if Vago's hands were still there, and she rocked back and forth trying to vomit or cry, with snot dripping on her lips. The sun was setting, and those that had watched the fight were bored now. They dispersed in small groups. No one congratulated her. No one asked her how she was doing. When the sun was totally gone, and only a bloody red glow hummed on the horizon, she stood. She staggered back towards the entrance to the sty. In her mind, Dex relived the fight with Vago. A lot of it was a haze. She couldn't remember why they were fighting in the first place. It was probably inevitable. Vago said she won, but she didn't feel like a winner. She felt like maybe she survived, but certainly didn't win anything. She may have dazed Vago, but ultimately, she did far less damage to him than he did to her. She would be bruised and limping for a week, maybe longer. Is that winning? Maybe she should have killed him. He killed her. He did, as far as he knew. Stupid, she thought. Why am I so stupid? Stupid little Dex, always so stupid. As she entered the sty, it was dark. It occurred to her that Vago was not stupid, and it would be just like him to wait in ambush for her in her miserable apartment. That's when she had the idea to ask her new friends to share her room. They were friends, after all, even if she had been a little hard on them. Arlu, the doctor, and Rowan, the not really a teacher. They were supposed to be working in the stalls. Or did she forget to tell them that? Her head ached, and the slaves were nowhere in sight. She knew they were gone. Yeah, they might be in the slavery, or the mess hall, or milling around. But no, Dex knew they were gone. Oh no, she mumbled. There's no escape from this place. Dex went out onto the muddy flat facing the moors and peered into the night. She groaned and kicked a clump of grass. Stupid. We're all going to get ourselves killed. Besides the fact that the Junlin moors were a vast wasteland with no shelter or way markings, roved by wolves and gores. There were also rillers and sawjaws lurking on the edges. Dex wavered in the doorway. There wasn't much point in going after them. They could be anywhere. On the other hand, Ruby would hold her responsible for their disappearance, and it was her fault for not explaining to them how hopeless the situation was. Finally, she decided to climb up the watchtower and have a look, however useless. No one ever watched from the watchtower. It was shabby and skeletal. Dex climbed as best she could, wincing as she lifted her arms. She had climbed the tower several times since the first carving night, but now she was in tremendous pain from her fight with Vago. She hadn't even reached the top when she saw a light in the distance, a campfire dancing in the mist. She could hardly believe her luck, or their carelessness. If Dex could see it, so could others. And the more she thought about it, it was almost like they wanted to be spotted. Dex reached the top of the watchtower and sat down on a mat of dry reeds she had brought there weeks before. In the still night air, she pondered what to do next. Rather than grope her way, tired and sore through the bladderbogs of the moor, Dex resolved to seek out the strangers first thing in the morning. She felt uneasy about returning to the sty, as Vago had ambushed her there before, and this thought reminded her of the weathered bones of the sentry still moldering at his post. Sorry about your skull. Head, she whispered to his ghost that must be nearby. I'm sorry you've been up here so long. I'll bury you real cozy when I get back, I promise. To show that she meant it, she fumbled in the dark with as much respect as possible to gather up the remaining bones and armor. In this way, she found the old sentry sword among the moss and leaves. The sheath had rotted off of it, and the steel was mottled with rust, but it was a sword nonetheless. It was an unusual implement, even by Warghoul standards. It was only about as long and wide as Dex's forearm, with serrations on the spine. It was heavy enough to chop through cane, but with a clipped point that curved slightly upward. The handle was carved antler and had an aggressive guard, just a sidearm, but the weathered weapon gave her enough courage to return to her apartment. Anyway, she was too tired to worry about Vago anymore. She dropped out of the tower, dragged herself to the sty, and flopped down on the warm back of her favorite gore, and he at least was happy to see her.
Hello, listener. My name is Robert Napier. Congratulations on making it halfway through my audiobook, Dragger. I just wanted to say thank you for your support. If you enjoy this content or have suggestions on how to improve on it, please leave a like or comment. It would mean a lot, and I'd really appreciate it. There's still much more to experience in the dark world of Dragger. Consider subscribing so you never miss an episode. Thank you.